This is Jeremy Wentworth-Stanley. I'm the fellow who has a hyphen in my name. The hyphen is silent, but I am anything but that. We're going to be talking about something that is so fundamental, so basic, so extraordinarily ubiquitous everywhere. We're going to be talking about water. W-A-T-E-R, and I only spelt it out once because you do actually have to understand my accent gives it a slightly different interpretation. I say water, and I have a funny feeling that you say water. Yeah, exactly. It's not quite the thing.
Mine is a little bit better than the one that you just presented, but yes.
Okay, so we're talking about water. And this morning we have Jeremy Wentworth-Stanley. I am the voice of Respectonomics, and my co-host, Sarah Benton.
Good day, everybody.
And it is good day to the world, and an extraordinarily important subject about water. Now, most people, when you say water, start thinking about, supplies and reservoirs and all these kinds of things. We are talking about water as the absolute necessity for human existence. We have already, in our previous podcasts, we've been through food and light and people, hope. This time, and it's the final one that deals with existence, which is water. We need water to exist. And therefore, let's take a look at water and think about what you might call its interpretation or its meaning. And the first thing that comes to mind is water is either a boon or a bust. It's either wonderful and we love it, it's refreshing, it's cleansing, cleaning, and all those good things. It's wonderful, it nurtures the ground and so on. And it is also a terrible enemy when it comes in the forms of floods, ice storms, and the like.
Right.
So I think we want to examine water from the standpoint of it's that old expression, a wonderful servant and an appalling master. As long as we've got that straight, first of all, we can understand that water needs to be treated with great respect. The second thing about water, though, is its molecular composition is quite incredible. And I mention this because water is made up, and everybody will tell you this, it's either a liquid, or
Right.
It's a gas, or it's a solid.
Mm-hmm.
It's tripartite, if you will. And doesn't that resonate with the human being? That we also are tripartite beings. I think your expression is we are triads of a body and a mind and a spirit. And what's interesting is that water, it sort of draws alongside us and gives us that same parallel, same parable almost. And the reason that's important is we use water frequently. We use it for drinking. I think am I right in saying you've got a mug of water just by your fingertips?
I do. Water.
There it is. And interestingly, that water is in a container. And interestingly, that water has also got some ice cubes in it.
Yes.
So you've actually just represented almost the full extent of the composition of water. And here's something else that's bizarre about water. When you freeze water, it floats. Which is, if you think of a lake that's frozen, you think of the ice that's on the top. If you could imagine for a moment, if that ice instead sank to the bottom, most things, when you freeze them, they in fact increase their density and they sink.
Right.
Water does the opposite. And I think that should be very much a parallel with our humanity, that we also have the right and the ability to rise to the occasion, even though we may be frozen.
Right.
So with that in mind, I want to talk a bit about water. We've talked about its molecular construction and what it does, but let's take a look at it very personally. We've talked about the body, the mind, and the spirit. And I thought, well, Sarah, why don't we do that? Why don't we look at water as a necessity, first of all, for the body? And the first thing that comes to mind is, you need water. I think our bodies are 92, 93% water?
Something in that realm, yeah.
Something in that. So it's pretty straightforward that the body needs water all the time. And we think in terms of having a glass of water. We think in terms of, maybe having a pop.
Right.
whatever it is you're taking, but there's a sense of liquid that is necessary for our survival and, in fact, for our existence. So that's point number one. So we need it for that. It's refreshing. I think we see the sort of those pictures, and you've probably had it yourself. I have, when you're in the middle of the bush, it's a hot, hot day, and you suddenly realize there's a creek running just below you. And what do? You lean down and take the water in your hands and splash your face. That kind of refreshment is absolutely wonderful. So we've got the water that's sort of what you might call nutritional. We've got the water that's refreshing. We've got the water that does the cleaning. And most households in let's say in the rich world, most households have either showers or baths. It's all, or sinks. It's all to do with cleaning. And that cleaning process starts with water. So we've got water that now we know is a nutrient, it's a cleanser, and it's refreshing. We know it's cleansing. Cleansing's an important one, because what is that thing you do when you cut yourself or you burn yourself or something like that? You do injury. What's the first thing you do? You run it under the tap. You're trying to get rid of any of the, whatever you call it, bacteria,
Right.
germs, all those nasties. So we've got that as well. And the other thing about water is it's also incredibly useful for getting rid of our waste. So, for example, and here's something which is almost so basic, we never really talk about it, but when you brush your teeth in the morning and the evening, and I hope you do it 3 times a day,
Yes,
four
sir.
times, 4 times a day, you
Not 4.
all right. Well, whatever it is, you brush your teeth. But you know something? The thing is, you expectorate. You take out the waste, if you will, and you wash it down the sink. In other words, water is in that case being used to get rid of waste. Then we've got the idea of perspiration. And this is important because when you work hard, the human body will then it lubricates itself through perspiration. It's actually a cooling process, so that we see that perspiration. And the last one I want to talk about is evaporation. Now, evaporation means that when you stand outside and do nothing, have you ever found yourself saying, "I'm thirsty," and you reach for a glass of water?
Mhm.
Well, partly because we are evaporating. The water is being drawn away from our skins. Now, you may say, this sounds incredibly physical, and it's true. That's the body part of our lives. But Sarah, what I'd like to do then is take exactly those same principles and apply them to the mind.
Okay.
After all, we've agreed that we are triunal. We've agreed the water is triunal. So let's have a look and see what happens when we use water on our minds. How does that work? And the first thing you want to think about, I think we need to think about, is how do you refresh the mind? I mean, what are the techniques? We talk about water refreshing the body. What is the thing that we need to do to refresh the mind? And there are various techniques for doing it. But one of the most important parts of refreshing your mind is also regaining your identity. And to regain your identity, to remember who you are, to say, yeah, my mind needs refreshing. Everybody's different. Everybody's individualistic. You will say, for example, I refresh my mind by going for a walk in the woods. I
Right.
say, I refresh my mind by getting on the tractor. Whatever it might be, it's very individualistic. And the
Mhm.
one thing about respectonomics is it never tries to say what's the right way. It says the right way is the way that is right for you.
Correct.
What we're putting out on the table is the concept or the reality of refreshing your mind. If you don't refresh your mind, you end up with a dullness, you end up with loneliness, you end up with a lot of things that are frankly depressing or repressing or suffocating. So refreshing your mind is something we should do. Think about cleaning the mind out. One of the problems we have is so many of us get caught up in what you might call thoughts of anxiety, thoughts of where we've screwed up, and we get into guilt and all those kinds of stuff. The clarion call is let's use that water principle to clean out our minds of those things because they are intrinsically destructive. So we want to refresh the mind. We want to clean the mind. We want to cleanse the mind. The cleansing the mind is a very important dynamic because just like we said, the water is necessary for getting away the toxins, when you've hurt yourself, scratched yourself. The same thing applies to our minds. We need to be cleansed. We need to get rid of the toxins. Those toxins, and I know you might almost call them cancerous because they grow and you don't quite know how to stop them. I think one of the things with cleansing the mind is where we need the help from somebody else. The classic example would be a therapist, but where someone can actually identify the toxins and give us the tools to get rid of them. We think about getting rid of the waste in the human body. We need to get rid of the waste in the body, in the mind. Think of the things that we think about that are actually downright wasteful. They don't go anywhere. They're a pain in the neck. We should try and get rid of those, again, using the parable or the parallel of water. Perspiration. I think when the mind perspires, that's a comment on we are working the mind. And how you work your mind is an individual discussion. You can do it through education. You can do it through sharing ideas. You can do it through small groups. You can do it through writing poetry. You can do it just by writing. But perspiration of the mind is an expression of the fact that the mind is working. What a lovely image. The mind is working. The mind has been cleaned out. The mind has got rid of the waste, and the mind is refreshed. Because when we do that, if you think of it, that puts us in a place of greater contentment, greater productivity, greater innovation. The last one is this business of evaporation. Because one of the things that happens is, I don't know about you, but I'm older than you. I'm the mature one. Come on. Come on.
Okay, sure.
Okay. But as we get older, our minds do evaporate. And stuff, what's the word, wanders away. And we find it's represented sometimes in memory, sometimes in focus or attention, or whatever it is. I don't think there's an answer to that because the body naturally evaporates. The mind naturally evaporates. I was told that the mind stops growing when you're 25 years old. I don't agree with that. Personally, my experience is the mind continues to grow. But what I'm getting at is we need to be aware of the evaporating process and almost don't fight it. What are you going to do about it? I mean, when we think about, your body evaporating and you go and get a glass of water. So therefore, we should go back and get the things that replace the nutrients or whatever's that have been lost.
Right.
Do you think that's fair?
Yes. I think there are tools and resources out there that can help you continue to stimulate your mind, right? To make up for some of that loss or to slow it down or what have you.
Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, I think one of the examples that I think comes to mind here is the memory clinics, which I think they do a wonderful job of doing one thing, and that is establishing baselines.
Right.
So when you go back 5 years later, you can see if you've evaporated or not. It just makes sense. But now moving along to the third component. So we've talked about the water to the body, the water now to the mind. We're going to talk a bit about water to the soul. And what I want to emphasize on watering to the soul is we, in our whole Respectonomics rollout, we have pointed out that inner being, that soul, the spirit, the character of oneself is like a reservoir, and it needs to be refilled because a reservoir works on one principle. Clean water comes in. I said clean water comes in, meaning, in other words, we don't want to be bringing in the dirt. Right. You have clean water coming into the reservoir, but the key to a reservoir is it also has an outflow. It is designed to bring in. It is also designed to let out. So one of the things that our mind needs to be doing, or our soul needs to be doing, is accepting the new water, but also being very mindful of the need to let it out. And that parallel does two things. How you build your reservoir, of character and so on, is again an intensely personal decision. And I want to emphasize something, Sarah. Respectonomics stands on one principle or one guide, I think, and that is that we honor other people's freedom of choice.
Mm-hmm.
So how somebody wants to rebuild or refill the reservoir of their soul is a personal decision. But I think it's a very important one to do. And then also in that same breath, how do we then let the water out? How do we benefit other people? Because one of the things I have found is the more I dignify me, the more I dignify others. The more I dignify others, the more I dignify me.
Right.
It's an incredibly circular. It's a vortex in reverse. It's like a yeah, it's wonderful and it grows. So all we're talking about here is then the ability to grow the soul or the inner being that each one of us will make up how we do it. So that's the personal side. Now I am going to lay down the gauntlet. Are you ready?
I'm ready.
Because this is, I think, and I hope you will agree, Sarah, I'd like your comment on this. I think what we've just talked about is really embracing the complexities and the beauty of the human being. And we're talking here about the mind and the body and the soul, but we're talking about how do we build them all up? I think a lot of our identities get lost when we fail to come back to these three elements. We need our identities. They're fantastically important. And each person is different. Each person has a different agenda, a different story, a different narrative, and can make the difference to where they live and who they live with and so on. Are we?
Agreed. Yes.
We're in sync.
Yes.
Okay. So let me move to the next one, the gauntlet part of it. And that is in the corporate world, in the business world, in the political world, what assurance do I have that we are being watered appropriately? I think that's a fair question. If it's true that I need to water me as a human being, then I think it's also incumbent on those in those positions of leadership to be doing the watering. You can't just say, well, I don't want to water the flowers today. You can say that if you want, but guess what? The flowers will die.
Well, it's hierarchical, right? Because if you think about if you're pouring water onto a garden that's dry and the water, saturates down through the soil. So I know that's not necessarily the way that we always like to think of things, but most companies are structured or built on a hierarchy.
Yeah.
And so I think even all levels need to be provided with that watering, if you will, even the leaders, because what filters through them is what filters down.
You've made an incredibly interesting point. Like this one, you get the gold star.
Yay.
Oh, yes, here we go. Because you've pointed out that the corporation or government is based on a hierarchical pyramid-like shape, yes?
Yes.
It gets pointier and pointier as you go up to the top. Do you know when you want to water a tree, where do you water the tree? You do it at the outside of where the tree line, where the branches are. So if the branches are stretched out, you take that tree line. It's at that point that you water the tree. You don't water the tree at the trunk. You water it at the outside because that is where the tree gets its nutrients from.
Right.
And the same applies to the corporation. If you're not watering right down to the outside so that the whole organization can benefit, then you're not watering properly.
Right.
So that means that the top needs absolutely to be paying attention to the bottom. That is gauntlet number one. Gauntlet number two is that the whole principle of water is a free flow. You said we pour water on the garden. Water in a container will go nowhere.
Right.
By definition, it's a state of inertia. But in fact, if you want that water to work, you have to let it flow. And corporations, politicians, I wonder how much free flowing there is. I'm talking about free flowing of information, free flowing of respect, free flowing of dignity, free flowing of all of those things that we've just talked about that apply to the human being. Why are they not, in many cases, free flowing hierarchically from the top right the way through the piece, because they don't. And I'm putting down the gauntlet on that. I can certainly say in the political world that the concentration of power at one level is not being properly reflected at the bottom and being watered correctly. We deal with water. We talked about it being a boom or a bust. We can talk about water being a swamp, us being swamped, or in a period of drought. And I think when you talk to employees, why is it you hear words like I'm swamped? And why do you hear words like I'm dried out?
Right.
You hear that all the time.
Mm-hmm.
And you come from an HR background, so you can say yes or no to that. But that's been my experience.
Mm-hmm.
And then we've got this whole business of how do you feed the soul of a corporation? How do we water that? And you know something? I think the one thing that is missing is the faith and the trust. We talk about faith and trust in the management and the political leaders, and turning that around. It's time for that faith and trust to be represented in the people, in the employees, that you trust your people. We see so much of that being hijacked through excessive regulation, excessive compliance, excessive rules. You can't go outside that corridor. We need to have a management style, a political style, a business style that in fact will allow people to think and act independently, not irresponsibly.
Yes, encourage.
Exactly.
Encourage, right? Encouragement.
Yeah. Now, out of all of this, we've got a situation where I think that the average politician, the average manager, really doesn't know whether they're watering their troops, watering their people correctly or incorrectly. And I think do you think that's a fair statement?
Yeah, I was just going to say you don't know whether they're watering them or they're drowning them.
Right on. And here is the answer, and this is my final gauntlet. My final gauntlet is that management, politicians need to come back to the people, number one, to communicate. I mean, water is a connecting link. It doesn't just stick around and go nowhere. It always goes somewhere. Water goes to its natural level. The management needs, and I call it the management, those in those hierarchical positions need to go to their followers and ask one question. What management practices can we change that would benefit you?
Mm-hmm.
I'll say it once more. What management changes can we make? What practices can we change that would benefit you in your work and your life and your productivity and so on?
Perfect.
I do rest my case this morning.
Thank you, Jeremy.
Thank you, Sarah.